and welcome to today's webinar, SMS Trust Crisis and the New Wave of Regulations. As our industry confronts a sharp rise in SMS fraud and declining consumer confidence, regulators worldwide are implementing unprecedented reforms, from sender ID registries to stringent KYC requirements. I'm Nasia Skulikariti, Program Director at MEF, and I will be moderating this conversation with Dr. Marco Lefred, VP Business and Development at NetNumber. Together, we'll explore the global regulatory landscape reshaping A2P messaging, examine where self-regulation has worked, and discuss practical strategies for operators, for CPaaS vendors, and also enterprises facing compliance and fraud. Marco, welcome and thank you for joining me today for what I believe it will be a very enlightening conversation.
Thank you so much, Nasia. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm also looking forward to this very hot topic to me. Yeah.
Fantastic. Now, Marco, before we kick off, I can't help but notice your green wall behind you. And that's live, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It's moss. It gets harvested. And then there are some artists that rearrange the moss into like what they consider art, and I consider art. Maybe not everyone agrees, but I like it a lot. They put some preservatives on it, so you don't have to care much about it. And I was originally concerned that it might actually not last, but it's almost 4 years old now, and it still looks as day one. So thank you. I'm happy that you like that.
My pleasure. And like your life well behind you, the messaging industry has had its beauty, I would say, over the years, hasn't it? So to kick off our discussion, Marco, from the NetNumber perspective, how would you characterize the current state of trust and fraud in A2P messaging globally?
Yeah. First reaction is serious, like very, very serious. But with the developments over the past 12 to 18 months, I would say also very hopeful. And when answering that question, I would say, like, many people are aware what's going on with regards to like fraud and whatnot. But I think what's not being highlighted enough, that the state of trust and fraud has actually two sides to it. Let me quickly explain to you what I mean by that. So the first side, what I would call the industry internal problem, right? It's where we are facing challenges due to inflated termination rates, due to like artificially inflated traffic, and like also like message trashing and whatnot. And there, the solution providers have already reacted to the evolving threat landscape and enriched their portfolio of anti-fraud tools. Even us here at NetNumber, for example, we have launched multiple new services to reduce customer risk, our customers' risk to be involved in fraud. So I don't want to go into depth here. So everybody that's interested can go back and look at our previous webinars on, for example, NumberLock and NumberView, which are services protecting North American business numbers from abuse, or like more recently also the fraud prevention registry webinars that we have giving about enabling operators, financial institutions, security vendors to collaboratively share intelligence on numbers confirmed to be involved in fraud. So that's one side of the problem. It's imperative for us to like take this serious and work on this, because it's critical to protect revenue, of course. But if you're honest, like AIT and termination rates is not what keeps the public awake at night. Like I think if I ask my friends, they don't know what I'd be talking about. But that drives me to the other side of the things. The public also has a problem with our industry, as we're dealing with the aforementioned all-time high in scams and consumer complaints.
Okay.
Yeah, like almost daily, I would say there are headlines in the media about mobile abuse, industry scandals, and like even like the recent, although unrelated to consumer scams, the bankai controversy. Like these headlines, they damage our ability to rebuild trust,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a piece where I would say it's not a surprise to me that the regulators around the world now feel obliged to basically intervene and put a stop to it, right? So, but to like close the loop to being hopeful, I want to say is like their intention isn't to shut down A2P SMS when they go for regulation, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's also the regulators' ambition and goal to keep the channel viable. So there is strong public support to maintain SMS, but as always, the devil is in the details here.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Before we get into more specifics on the regulations, do you think, I mean, how can we actually balance what you just mentioned, the industry challenges, be it that's from the vendor side or the enterprise side, versus the consumer challenges? Because you mentioned, your friends are not aware of what we're talking to if we say anything about AIT or any of those type of frauds, and so are my friends as well. But how can we balance this?
Um, I think there is a key difference in like approaching both problems, right?
Mm-hmm.
The industry internal problem, there are possibilities that I would say players find a way to deal with the problem in their own business.
Mm-hmm.
They do require collaboration, um, but I think for the majority of cases, you're also fine in like bilateral relationships, bilateral agreements, in like implementing technical solutions to protect your own business, your own operations, your own revenues. Whilst on the other hand, like in the public domain, like we have to go with united voice. Like there has to be industry-wide collaboration. There have to be central solutions. Like you can't
Mm-hmm.
have like different approaches by CPaaS and MNOs that potentially are competing, because in that case, it would always leave gaps and holes that would be devastating. Like you won't be able to restore. And in addition, those messages aren't also not strong enough to to calm down politicians and media, I would say, um, and ultimately will not have the effect on the consumer protection that is required, because the fraudsters are way too sophisticated now and are way too well organized. They will adopt. They will find these holes. So it needs collaboration and a united front to answer these problems
Mm-hmm.
that are observed by the public.
That's very interesting. And we know that in some areas collaboration is possible, in other areas it's more challenging. But do you think that there is one emerging, well, one doesn't have to be one, but is there an emerging fraud type that we are underestimating at the moment?
That's a very interesting question. I think what we can definitely say, if we take a look at what's going on, is that the overarching public response is that um, you have to get better control of who gets access to the
Mm-hmm.
ecosystem. You also have to do better checks of who is actually originating traffic. And I think this all starts, and the regulators agree, if you take a look at recent consultations and launches of sender ID registries, with stop of spoofing, right? And it all begins with the ID that's being used. So
Mm-hmm.
fighting the spoofing of sender IDs is crucial, and it's the first step to make anything else work. And I think if you gradually go into this and have deployments of such nature, you can then think about what else to do and what comes after that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I guess this is a good point to also discuss the role of number intelligence in restoring the protecting the stakeholders' trust, right? You did mention the sender ID on the previous, and that how a bigger role that plays, but the overall number intelligence, how is that worked into reigniting the trust in the key stakeholders.
Yeah, that's a very central point to it. I mean, today, if you receive traffic on the telecommunications network, right, you know where it's coming from, so you know your next hop.
Mm-hmm.
You know what is being put as originating identifier, sender ID, phone number, alphanumeric shortcode, whatever that might mean, plus the content of the message and the recipient. Um, with regards to how do I react to this like transaction, to
Mm-hmm.
this call or to this SMS, and here particularly to the SMS, that is not a lot of information, right? So what you need is you need sources like net number where you can go say, I'm receiving an SMS from this phone number, from this like shortcode, from this alphanumeric sender ID. What else can you tell me about it? Like, can I
Mm-hmm.
trust this? Should I be routing this? How should I treat this? What should I expect from this originator? And furthermore, you can also perform additional checks like, am I supposed to receive this sender ID, that telephone number from that particular partner that I'm connected to? So getting metadata around phone numbers is crucial for in-flight, but it's also going to be crucial for rectifying issues that you've overlooked, right? So once your
Mm-hmm.
in-flight or live protection is failing and you have had an incident of fraud, you have to investigate this root cause analysis, and then you have to rectify it. You have to potentially also argue invoices and whatnot. Like, this is very hard if you only have the transactions. You need
Mm-hmm.
metadata in order to properly like act on that. And this is where number information is very, very crucial.
That's very interesting indeed. And that's actually a very good segue to start talking a little bit about the regulations and what's happening in the world. We've seen mandatory sender ID registries launched in places such as Ireland, Australia, Spain. And what are the key differences and lessons learned from these registry rollouts?
Yeah, yeah. Um, Ireland, Australia, and soon to like follow Spain from what you see from consultations. I think there are good examples of what I would call like the first wave of a global regulatory shift, and their approaches are certainly driven by the collapse in consumer trust and the fraud headlines. And I think it's worth diving probably into like each and every country in itself briefly, because you learn different things from, because they've also like from a timeline perspective are coming one after the other. You see learnings, and there is different things that you can see and learn about how policy shapes the ecosystem, right? But what you can see, and I think that's very positive and also
Mhm.
giving hope, is that throughout the consultations and RFIs, if you read them and take a look at that, you notice that the regulators become increasingly informed, right? So 2 years ago, we still had to have debates and conversations around what are best practices,
Mhm.
where to start to protect the ecosystem. And now, central ID registration is generally and widely accepted as the answer and the first response for a short-term solution across any central ID, short code, long code, alphanumeric. I
Mhm.
think what you though see, and this brings me to the different countries, is you see an evolving understanding of the operational complexity behind it. Because at first sight, or at first assumption for many of those were like, okay, like registration of sender IDs, it's pretty easy, right? I take a database, I put IDs in it, I associate them with companies, I vet the companies, and I'm done.
Mhm.
Um, but it's not that simple. As mentioned before, devil lies in the details. And um, it shows that there is deep experience required around A2P message routing, about MNO and aggregator network protection, as well as day-to-day CPaaS operations. And I give examples. So Ireland, out of those three examples that you mentioned that we can pick, and I'm fine, you recognize that they did a very thorough job through their consultation. It was a long consultation. They
Mm-hmm.
had a lot of responses. They took the responses seriously. They incorporated them in their next rounds, etc. But still, after the introduction, when Conrad took over, and I think they're doing a good job in taking that on and taking such a strong leadership role, but they're still having challenges in the day-to-day operations with regards to provisioning problems. They have legitimate traffic being interrupted. They have legitimate traffic being wrongly flagged. They have their timeline pushed out for introduction of certain actions that they have planned. So there are they overlooked the complexity and the maturity of the solution that they require to ensure a proper business continuation. And I think if you take a look at Australia, whilst they are
Mm-hmm.
still taking a very independent implementation path by wanting to do a lot of the implementations by themselves, the industry has raised many concerns about edge cases that I think you can see there in their consultations that they have actually taken serious. Examples
Mm-hmm.
include shared sender IDs,
Okay.
the difference between domestic and international senders, and how that impacts, and so on and so forth, right? So how they're launched, because they haven't launched yet, is going to be perceived, remains to be seen. But I think by the way that the consultations were driven and the way that the industry responded, you see a learning curve.
Okay.
Ultimately, if you take a look at Spain, which is the most recent, it concluded recently, um, they did not even ask any consultation around whether the establishment of a central sender ID registry is meaningful or not. If you take a look at and do online research, you would see that they immediately asked about and focused on how to adopt it and how to roll it out,
Mm-hmm.
which shows the increasing regulatory maturity when it comes to this topic. So yeah,
Oh,
in summary, they have all in common that they regard the central sender ID registry solution uh, as the answer to customer-facing abuse. And the
mm-hmm.
difference they have is how deeply and how much do they actually collaborate with the industry when rolling out and implementing their solution. And I think that will ultimately also determine the adoption and success of the registries.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting. And from your vantage point, though, what does best in class looks like in registry design? I mean, you covered, what the
Yeah,
regulators are doing, but I'm more interested to hear what you think, because you've been in the middle of all of these things and you've seen what works and what doesn't work.
yeah. An important factor here is how the industry is organizing themselves on the back end, right? And a model that I personally liked a lot, even before I worked at NetNumber, is what the US ecosystem has done with their central 10-digit phone number registry,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which was later then expanded into also the 10 DLC model, which
Mm-hmm.
is globally regarded as being successful. The underlying principle why the North American market is successful is because they have the Net Number Services Registry, right? The NNSR.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not just saying that because I work at NetNumber, but I always like to cite the FCC because they also did consultations, but then decided not to act and not to do anything because they ultimately ended up at saying, and I quote, "We agree that number spoofing in the SMS, MMS domain is rare at this time." And this is from December 2023, by the way. And
Mm-hmm.
that providers generally permit their customers to initiate texts only from numbers for which they are the assignee, right? So it's a very small quote, if you will, but it contains a lot. And I think it's a great public proof that the design that was chosen in the US with a self-regulated model, uh, utilizing the NNSR in the background, can deliver real trust outcomes here,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you asked about the design, and maybe a few words here. I think the core strengths or the core value that lies behind the success of the Net Number Services Registry is that it provides three essential pillars on a high level that help securing the ecosystem, right? It restrains bad actors through the central registration of SMS providers and services. Secondly, it prevents the spoofing by distributing registered sender IDs and metadata, and I emphasized the importance of that earlier, in real time. And thirdly, it also enables end-to-end delivery chain traceability through lookups of sender IDs, assignment of services, and so forth. So these are the high-level principles of what it has to bring to the table. And there again, like we're providing that service over 15 years now. There is a lot of detail to it in order to get it right. And there has been a lot of evolution in that platform as well. And there has been a lot of changes over time. So one of the key principles that are also very important if you start looking into this is don't have your view too narrow. Sender ID registration is certainly the thing that comes first to mind right now, but requirements will change over time. You will have more feature requests, right? So the solution that is chosen or being implemented needs to be flexible enough to be future-proof and needs to be able to support multiple use cases without tremendously increasing the implementation requirements and complexity of using it. Because don't get me wrong, but if you introduce that and it is not workable, right, then it doesn't bring its results. Like it has to be simple in terms of how it is being consumed and used. And that's underestimated by, unfortunately, some of the most recent examples where governments introduced their own registries.
Okay, so that's you already gotten. I mean, you explained a lot about the DLC and its perceived self regulation as a success story, and you mentioned quite a few of the strengths, its core strengths, and why it has been such a success. But are there any notable shortfalls that we need to address here and to make our audience aware of?
You can always do better, right? And I think one important factor to understand here is that technology can only deliver so much, but a lot of the success in the US also comes from the fact that the industry has agreed on the policies that should govern 10DLC and the other messaging channels. So I recently also thought about this because you might know or might not know that also Canada, for example, has agreed to adopt the 10DLC implementation principles of the US. And I think this reinforces that this approach scales internationally without the need for heavy regulation because it's not brought to the industry through heavy regulation. But there, for example, something that I personally think needs to be improved. We're very good at securing, managing, locking in the sender IDs now, and making sure that only like authorized providers and services can use them. But the content is still something that's of a different kind of like a beast, right? There's of course also different regulation to what extent you can actually look into the content and do something based on content. But I think there's a challenge that you can still have as a fraudster, even if you don't have the benefits of the central ID immediately giving you credibility because you're spoofing a known and trusted origin. You can still, through like very smart phrasing and social engineering, perform a brand impersonation inside the message content. And there, I think it's not a technical limitation to what's being done so far. It's more a lack of industry agreement of what policies should be implemented here to also protect that level in a unified way across all players. There are certainly players that have implemented certain protections based on content globally for sure. But as I said earlier, in order to protect the public, these things need to be collaborative. they can't be one by one implementations. So the industry needs to come together here and also tackle that issue for sure.
And we also had the example of Singapore, right, has become a difference point, I would say, sometimes a cautionary tale for global brands. What aspects of Singapore's registry requirements created the most friction for international traffic? And what recommendations do you have for regulators pursuing cross-border solutions? I mean, we've seen what happens in certain APAC regions, Europeans as well, that with the government and regulatory bodies, and also, in the US and also Canada with a self-regulation. What happened in Singapore?
Yeah, true. I'm glad that you mentioned Singapore. Yes, it can be used as a cautionary tale. On the other hand, I also have to admit that they were one of the first to ever dare to actually take that step. So it's not to be too negative about what happened there, but there's certainly certain learnings that they didn't have yet that in the more recent examples were respected. So in Singapore, the way that I understand the situation, which is already like a few years back now, they were preparing for self-regulated model, but the regulator stepped in and took over, probably because they felt that self-regulatory might not be strong enough. I don't know, maybe they should have looked more into the S. But unfortunately, as far as I'm aware, there was limited public consultation and also minimal open collaboration. There has been collaboration, of course, and many people have contributed, including the brands, to the solution design. But there are a few things. For example, if they would have included all A2P sender ID types in their considerations right from the beginning, and if they would have considered international brands with international A2P traffic that do not have a local Singaporean entity, and if they would have aligned more closely with existing successful global models like the 10 DLC, I think it is likely that they could have avoided the issues that they had around legitimate traffic being disrupted whilst the launch was happening, and also the decline and in revenue that they have seen. I think over time, another learning there is that they sort of admitted that they can't really combat the smishing and banking fraud that is related to SMS, unfortunately, with what they have created, which ultimately contributed in their case probably also a bit to the ban of SMS OTPs for banking authentication there. Although that was not regulated, it was the financial industry, as far as I'm aware. It still shows that they have done something to protect the industry, but they could have done more to be more successful here. And I think the reason there was probably that the emphasis was coming from the regulator to reduce fraud and fight the negatives, and the focus on protecting legitimate use cases and protecting revenue was probably taking a smaller role. So there was a little bit of an imbalance here, which is not a surprise if I would say the regulator coming with the public interest, right? And I think it's always beneficial for the industry if the industry can proactively approach these problems, having their businesses in mind and also their revenues. So yeah, I think that's an example where you can definitely say in other countries going forward, where you would anticipate that something like this is imminent, where potentially the regulators have already warned the industry that if you can't get a hold of the problems that the public is experiencing, like in these countries, like don't try to reinvent the wheel, don't try to do it yourself, and don't underestimate the complexity that you like get yourself into if you start from scratch. But really rely on like proven models and implementations instead of building new solutions.
So we've seen that, I mean, it's evident that self-regulation and both government mandates, they both have trade-offs that we need to weigh and see what's more applicable for the local situation when it's addressed. And when it comes to compliance at the same time, that usually means cost and complexity. Of course, we get the protection, but we have to consider, the complexity of implementing these services and also the additional cost. And for me, it's like I'm very curious to see what will that do to smaller organizations. Were they competing with larger organizations who have the resources and the funds to set this up? Um, are there any scalable solutions, perhaps, that can address this conundrum?
There's definitely a challenge around the scale of these solutions, right? Because the the smaller your implementation, the less automation you have, the higher the per case cost is going to be in order to operate a Sender ID registry, right? Um, so what in short term everybody will feel in terms of pain is changes in workflows, changes
Hmm.
in registration setups, potentially reapplication for existing use cases, et cetera, et cetera. And in order for smaller enterprises to benefit there and not being left behind, and also have their businesses protected, automation is required, right? Like you need to have these processes fully automated in a way that the cost per registration is very, very low.
Hmm.
Um, and I think if you hear also our partners from TCR from Aegis speak about costs of registrations and the scalability of the cost in these cases for the 10 DLC implementation, you will understand that there are options to keep this at a very low cost.
Hmm.
Whilst in other scenarios where the industry is not as much involved, and Ireland is an example, currently the operations is a bit overwhelming there. So if you're a smaller brand and your traffic has been interrupted, and I just recently heard an example in one of the GSA talks about it, that as long as you don't know somebody at Comrec, like you have basically an issue in getting currently your traffic up and running.
Hmm.
It will take you a long time. And what happens generally in that time until the processes are all scaled up, the smaller ones will have to go for alternatives. And this is a loss of traffic in business that will most likely not be recovered. But
Hmm.
why would you, as a small enterprise, go back and pay the extra effort to reinstate what you lost, not to do it to your own fault, right? So
Hmm.
that's the reality.
I think what you mentioned right there about optimization and automation is where I've been heavily involved and embedded in the past year plus, and I can help but drop it in there, Marco, the effect that AI and AI automation will have to all this. Because if we can implement the right workflows and automate with the help of AI, surely that should help us reduce the cost further and have the implementation being approachable and open to all.
It's definitely a factor, right? That you have to always consider that the deployment of new technology can help you. But to the extent, and I think what is also important for everybody facing this and not being hit by the wave by surprise is you have to prepare for it. And
Hmm.
when you talk about automation and AI, an important factor here is like you can't automate what's not working. Like
Yeah,
it's, I think you preach this every day. Like you
hmm,
have to get your processes right before you can
exactly.
automate. And that's one of
Exactly.
the reasons why I want to evangelize that don't start from scratch. If you don't have the experience and you try to create processes on a whiteboard, on a blank piece of paper, they will look nice. But without the experience of actually running them day to day, you will have to make adjustments.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that's the biggest red flag when I hear we're going to do this from scratch in a new project. You can deploy as much AI as you will. Like they can't predict what's going to be the perfect process for you. Like they only help you once you have established what's the perfect processes, right? Like what's the KYC requirements. You can then automate parts of this probably to an agentic AI. But yeah, that's
Well,
an important piece. Yeah.
we can spend the rest of the time on this webinar talking about what that means, and we're just gonna be scratching the surface, but absolutely. And just to use a cliche for that matter, is junk in, junk out. If your systems are not ready and the operations are not ready and the processes are not there, AI is not going to help you. It's actually going to create more problems. But anyhow, that actually brings me to the next segment of what I want to cover today. And that has to do with the bigger impact and adaptation and what that means for the stakeholders in general. So what are the greatest, I would say, short-term challenges that operators, CPaaS players, aggregators, and brands face under these new compliance regimes?
Yeah. I think it's many things that they will have to face. Let's try to summarize the most important factors on a short term, as you rightly pointed out. So I think it all starts with education.
Mm-hmm.
So the biggest short-term challenge in these regions, but also in other regions, is the education. As I said before, until you know that this is happening, it will take a while. So these things typically already start developing and evolving years before they go live.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, at least 2 years, because also like regulators are not that fast. But even on a self-regulated implementation, the coordination of all players requires months. So one of the short-term challenges is like you have to know what's going on, and you need to have somebody in your organization that has the accountability assigned to deal with the preparation and the handling of this new wave of regulations, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I think the problems that will occur for brands on a short term is the fact that they're going to have to reapply. They're going to be new registration flows. They will probably be faced with service disruption because they don't run a good inventory of what they're actually servicing today and
Mm-hmm.
how they like reach what channels they have active. With regards to aggregators, operators, and CPaaS, I think they will also be facing, specifically in the cases when the regulators enforce the processes that have not been proven yet, they will have to deal with complaint
Mm-hmm.
spikes, right? Like they will have to like handle that for sure, as well as adjustments in traffic screening and routing based on the additional information that's presented to them. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's twofold, like operational processes, onboarding, traffic registration, monitoring, controls. That will be impacted and change, as well as you will need some sort of like budget to react to the change, as well as have
Mm-hmm.
staff ready for what's going on during rollouts. Yeah.
And should we expect an initial dip in messaging traffic? Have you seen effective mitigation strategies? Because when a register is first implemented, I would assume it takes a while for everything to adjust. So logically, you would expect that there is some dip in what's happening with the traffic.
Oh, I would love to come back and have that conversation in 2 years' time from now. So far, what you see is that I don't think there has been a roll-off of a central registry by a regulator that has been only smooth. So I
Mm-hmm.
think there has always been like turbulences and hits against traffic, but it's getting better. With regards to how the adoption of 10DLC in Canada, for example, will go, we have a close eye on this, but I anticipate that is going to be way smoother with regards to impact to revenue and traffic.
Mm-hmm. And for enterprises, especially Marco, that are operating internationally, how is sender ID registration impacting business timelines, ROI, and for that matter, messaging reliability?
Yeah, I love that question. Um, I think first of all, when you do a central registry, like you level the playing field, right? You have to publish your policies so everybody knows, everybody's treated the same way and is treated rightly. So an advantage that definitely comes with it is that legitimate traffic should be unhindered, and
Hmm.
over time is very well protected against like future problems. And I think this is going to be a great impact and great change
Hmm.
for sure. Um, Another thing that you always have to take into account as well, like if regulation hits, um, it will have an impact on your budget, right?
Hmm.
So either way, if it's graceful, uh, which is generally anticipated, um, I think you can have a way more, how to put it, optimistic and constant budget planning compared
Hmm.
to the in markets where there is a lack of such guidelines.
Hmm.
Um, Also, I think what is important to state is like if you have started to record chain of custody, if you have started to distribute anti-fraud intelligence into the ecosystem from a central place, if you have end-to-end traceability and whatnot, you also open up capabilities to innovate, right?
Hmm.
Because you now have a handle on the fraud, you have control mechanisms, central control mechanisms in place that you can extend. Like you can put in like more processes and policies to faster react to adjustments in the fraud landscape, right? Whilst the first implementation of a registry might take you 2 years and adoption 3 to 4 months, rolling out another feature is way faster.
Hmm. Hmm. Now, I would be remiss not to mention, since we're talking about brands and what happens to their ROI, what has been happening, and that's the shift to other channels rather than messaging, be it RCS, be it WhatsApp, and silent authentication, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Some believe that this regulatory headwinds had some impact on it, but what do you think?
I'm actually not sure I would call them headwinds to be honest here. Um, and I like to kick off a controversy probably, but if you take a look at the internal problems that I mentioned, AIT, massive trashing, and all of the bad
Hmm.
practices that are also affecting legitimate traffic, like if you take a step further and you say, okay, we're now like from a public interest starting to actually clean up the industry, right?
Hmm.
You ultimately also anticipate, due to better traceability, that your delivery rates will go up. And if you take a look and compare that or measure the strength of SMS to be competitive, for example, to WhatsApp, um, I think it's actually improving its position because it lifts its KYC requirement or registration requirements to the same requirements that WhatsApp had from the beginning, right? The channel, the WhatsApp business channel, was introduced right from the start with the registration of who is the sender, of the
Hmm.
sender ID, and ultimately also of the use case and the content. So with this, the gap is only closing with regards to protection mechanisms for legitimate traffic. So I think I advocate for self-regulation, but either self-regulation or regulation, the implementation of local and regional clear policies on how to protect SMS traffic
Hmm.
will have a positive impact on the competitiveness of SMS and the sustainability of SMS as a channel in authentication or outreach or notification for sure.
Okay. That's quite interesting. And I think this is a good way to talk a little bit. We already touched upon it, but let's get a little bit deeper on the practical implementations. You mentioned a few steps earlier on in our discussion, but also, how can we get the folks that are listening, the operators, the CPaaS players, and even the enterprises compliance ready? For that matter, what are the most important operational and technical steps that they should be taking and now to prepare for new registry deployments, either new deployments or adjustments to what we have at the moment or the current, deployments?
Yeah, I'd like to start with the enterprises, right? Because they ultimately do not have the largest impact on what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So they can only prepare for the situation when the wave hits. And in these cases, I think what majority of them can improve on, what they can prepare, is to have proper inventory of their use cases, of their sender IDs, of their telephone numbers in use. That sounds trivial, but in large organizations, that can be a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And also in the same aspect, to understand which sender IDs they use and rely on for what use cases as of today. I think for carriers, CPaaS, and other platforms, there is more to be done in order to prepare, because I
Mm-hmm.
think you should not wait until it hits you. You should be proactive. As I said before, you should assign internal accountability, and then also participate in the discussions. The discussions are going on now, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you have the resource to participate yourself, awesome. If you don't, choose your representative, choose a forum that can then talk on your behalf,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because this way you become part of the solution, and you have influence how much impact it's going to have on what you're doing day to day to day. Like you can talk to NetMember, you can talk to us specifically for Canada, get early access to our solution, asked how it works, etc. If you're a country that anticipates such or is currently being even like warned by the regulator to do something about it, explore with us on how a set up with the NNSR could potentially help your ecosystem. If you want to choose a more broader discussion, I think the MAF is also doing a great job in facilitating conversations here, right? So
Mm-hmm.
MAF has the anti-fraud program,
Yeah.
with working groups specifically dedicated to these topics. There are roundtables at events. Mobile World Congress will have like roundtables on this topic for sure. And there is also a meeting that was recently held in Rome, where CXO exchange with the leaders of the CPaaS industry to specifically discuss this topic. I think in preparation and a best practice, like participate. If you're an MNO and a CPaaS, go to these forums, bring your input, participate, raise your voice. This way, there is no better way for you to get prepared than to actively get involved.
And let's not forget webinars like this one. Listen to them, take the best insights from guests like yourself. And also with MEF, we have the registry as well, that it's been quite good in the industry. So we should make sure that's brought up. Are there any recurring knowns, unknowns, Marco, that you see coming into the plane all the time when it comes to adoption? Or unknown unknowns, if it doesn't have to be known unknowns for that matter.
Yeah, so what we certainly see is the projects are being implemented, unfortunately, sometimes by people that have not a lot of experience in day-to-day operations.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's certainly something that should be avoided. And in many cases, I would also say a big factor is that the industry sort of looks at the regulator to guide them instead of turning it around and guiding the regulator,
Mm-hmm.
right? So this industry can, in different countries, on a country by country approach, decide to just wait for rigid, high cost regulation,
Mm-hmm.
or they can start and have a conversation around like unifying their voice and presenting a proposal to the regulator, like the NNSR, to proactively stop what's going on right now.
Mm-hmm.
What has been seen in some countries that are also starting to consult, that if you do that, if the MNOs come together, present a solution or a plan going forward, regulators tend to be willing to step back and say, okay, like if this is what you present, and you discuss this with us and we can understand how this is covering what we want from you, then off you go and do it by yourself. And I think that's an important message to bring across.
Okay, that's very interesting. And when it comes to looking forward, what will success look like in a regulated A2P messaging ecosystem?
Bright and shiny. I think one of the things that you see in the US and also in other areas where standard ID registries have
Hmm.
been implemented, um, spoofing can certainly be reduced to almost be eliminated. And I think that is a big factor in restoring the trust in SMS by restoring trust in the originating ID that you see in your inbox,
Hmm.
right? I think that's important. The ultimate measure for a success is the reduce and scam and customer losses. And I think Math is, for example, doing a great job in publishing some of these figures. And there are nice graphs if you have seen Stefano present some of the impacts, or more recently, Sham, the impacts of for example, like content protection, where you see the charts of scams and frauds, and then you say like launch date of solution, and then the chart just like rapidly goes down. I think these are the most impressive KPI curves that you can have. I think this
Hmm.
is what you're ultimately looking at. And then in the long term, it's definitely the disappearing of public complaint. That is also an important factor.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, and ultimately, whether the channel can sustain its revenue, like that's also why it's being done and why our industry and math members are so interested in this, right?
Yeah, yeah. And are there any specific KPI or market signals that you watch to determine if trust and um, sustainability are being restored for the matter? I mean, you having conversations with your customers, day in and day out, and that would be a key thing when you're talking to them. What do you measure?
Yeah. So if you can get it, complaint numbers is always nice, right?
Hmm.
So that's what you want to get down. And I think there are some countries and also even regulators who publish this. Um, First thing. Second thing is definitely revenue numbers, and I said that before. Like you can measure that. You don't get that publicly, but you know it for yourself.
Hmm.
That's crucial. So these two things are very, very important when it comes to the success.
Okay, and given your role with net number, have you seen that these regulations have shifted how the buyers acting or the workflows, for going to market strategies?
Um, what we have definitely seen is, and that's I think no secret, like in countries that never had central registration, right?
Mm-hmm.
That don't have a very good control over their A2P SMS traffic. Um, the adoption for long tail of the channel is a
Mm-hmm.
challenge, right?
Mm-hmm.
And specifically for them to get like branded solutions, so that they can use their business phone numbers or their business names is a challenge. So in some countries you have like, let's say, thousands of brands that use the messaging channel.
Mm-hmm.
While if you take a look at what's happening in the US, you have hundreds of thousands of businesses using that channel. So the central registration and keeping a track of this is definitely also opening up room for innovation and a service scale
Mm-hmm.
in markets, specifically also in the long-term market that wasn't possible before.
Okay, all right. Now we talked a lot about ID registries and beyond the center ID registries, what other industry-wide mechanisms do you think that we should be cognizant about and make sure that we get those right? Could be, interoperable authentication, AIT detection. You mentioned collaboration early on, which is obviously very, very important. But is there anything else that we really need to get down and dirty and get it right?
Oh, there is a conversation going on right now that is also very hot, but I don't anticipate that is an answer short term, which is the KYC, right? Like
Hmm.
how to do KYC. It is an extremely important topic, but I don't think that that's a topic where we will have an answer that is that mature as the answer to you have to do a central registration. So on how KYC in general looks for telco, for CPaaS, for long tail, etc., that's probably opening up another webinar that will take over an hour for sure.
That sounds good. And Marco, we covered a lot of multiple areas of what's going on in the industry, but I think one area that I really want to, and it might be a little bit touchy to speak about that, but with we mentioned that there are certain customers and enterprises that they're exploring these alternative channels. And is regulation then fueling that? We covered that a little bit earlier. But most importantly, I want to know what happens to SMS and to messaging. Will it be evolving, in a perfect world into this premium service, or will it fizzle away?
That's a very good question. I don't have a crystal ball. And SMS was declared dead for like years now. And if you take a look, it still has billions of a revenue globally. I think the UK market alone was recently valued, and Stefano wrote an article about it at around 400 million a year.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a big and important channel. And at the recent leadership exchange, all of the industry players agreed that the channel is a necessity still, provides a lot of value, and is also worth protecting and keeping. So it won't go away anytime soon.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that regulators are committed to investing into protecting the channel, and that other markets are also pushing for self-regulated solutions shows that there is commitment to this channel. So it won't go anywhere anytime soon. Is it though at a stage that is comparable to more fresher and younger services like network APIs or the WhatsApp business that still have double-digit growth on a year-to-year or even quarter-to-quarter? No, right? It's way too mature for that. So growth rates, I think SMS will not be able to compete anytime soon. At least I don't see how with the more innovative and newer channels, but it still is way more relevant for overall turnover than the new channels and the more fancier and hyped topics. And I think that alone gives it justification to give it a lot of attention.
Mm-hmm. And if there is history is anything to go by, I mean, I started my career 30 years ago in voice, and we were saying voice was dead for many, many years, and 30 years on, voice is still alive and it's doing quite well. So, I mean, one of the concerns that I've been hearing from people that I talk to when it comes to messaging is that messaging will become just a fallback channel to these other alternatives. But even as a fallback channel, I think it's quite lucrative. That's why we see new companies entering the market all the time. So I like you. I don't think personally, and this is my personal view, that it's going to go away. So we have just a couple minutes left. And in closing, if you had just one piece of advice, of strategic advice for operators and enterprises navigating 2026, let's look a little bit to next year and beyond for the matter, what would that be?
I think you need for yourself like a small roadmap in order to tackle this, right? Wherever you give accountability to look into this topic, I think an easy roadmap to keep in mind would contain 3 steps. First, don't try to reinvent the wheel. Don't try to go for something that can technologically only be built in 12 to 16 months, then it's too late. You have to rely on what's already been proven today. Don't reinvent the wheel. The second is form local alliances and present a unified industry plan with your local partners, with your local competitors, with your tier 1 aggregators if you're an MNO, with your local MNOs and MNO groups. You have to have a united voice in order to have a productive conversation with regulators and come to a graceful introduction of policies. And I would say the third, already start getting your processes right? Either by deploying like NNSR or other registries in a small scale, so you have a proven system of registration that works before the regulator demands it, right? So you can actually come and show already that you have cleaned up your house, if you will, before the tsunami, as I called it, will hit your market. I think those three. The last step is the most beautiful one, but it's also the last step. So get the first two first,
Yeah.
and I think that helps a lot.
Wise advice. And with that, Marco, I would like to thank you for joining me today and thank everybody for joining us as we unpacked the opportunities, the challenges, what's to come ahead, and how do we build the trust and resilience, for the matter, for our messaging ecosystem, because we need to keep it going for many years to come. Thank you, everyone, and have a great evening or morning, depending where you're based at. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.